Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Chit Chat. I'm Jeremy Roberts with Rebekah Reysen, and our special guest today, Dr. Marc Showalter. Dr. Showalter is a clinical assistant professor of leadership and counselor education here at the University of Mississippi. He's spent the previous 20 plus years as a counselor and administrator working with college students and their families. He's taught students from preschoolers all the way to graduate students, and has done a numerous amount of workshops and presentations on a variety of topics. His area of interest include a focus on developing the counseling relationship, as well as the personal experience of the counselor during the counseling process, some of which we're going to discuss on today's show. So without further ado, welcome to the Chit Chat, Dr. Marc Showalter.
Thank you.
Good to see you. We are excited to have you on the show. And
Happy to.
Good. Well, we're thrilled. And, you know, we'd love to start off kind of like, tell us about you, Dr. Showalter. What 5 words describe Dr. Marc Showalter?
Yeah, well, thank you again. That's really nice of you to invite me to be a part of this, and I'm really honored. 5 words. You know, the first word that comes to mind for me is I'm a lucky guy. I have been incredibly lucky professionally, personally, but, you know, since this is really about my professional life, so many fortunate things have happened to me just because people were very kind to me, and I happened to be in a place at a particular time, and opportunities were given to me, frankly, that had very little to do with me. And so when I look back on my professional life, I just feel so fortunate, because when I look at different people who came along at different times, who took an interest in me, who were willing to be mentors to me, who were kind to me when I didn't have any idea what in the world I was doing, who were open to helping me see what was possible for me. So I feel really lucky. And you know, it's as I sit here right now at the end of my career, I look back on it and I think, gosh, how did this even happen? Mostly I think about being really a fortunate person. And I think within that, you also get an idea. I'm not really a great planner. And so I'm kind of open to whatever happens to me. And so that flexibility has probably worked well for me, not when it came to getting things accomplished, but when it came to being opened up to different opportunities that came. So I don't know, those are a couple of things that I think about, and kind of, I don't know if that's not quite 5 words, but those are the kind of things I think of when I think about me and things that have happened to me professionally.
Well, we know that you have a lot of experience as a counselor. Did you always want to become a counselor?
Yeah, that is a great question, Jeremy. I am a great object lesson for people who don't know what they want to do in life. And so I did not know I wanted to be a counselor. In fact, I was in my 30s and didn't even know that counseling existed as a profession. And one of the things that has always been true for me is that I have just really not had plans and goals about my professional life. I love talking to people who say, oh, by the time I was 18, this is what I wanted to do, and I set this thing and I got to this. And I think that's wonderful, but that's not how it was for me. I started in college as an accounting major because my girlfriend's brother was an accounting major, and I thought, hey, that sounds like something to do. And I was, as I tell people, it turns out I was no account when it came to that. And then I drifted into elementary education because I've always liked children. But it's a good example of how lucky I was. I took a class in special education and had a wonderful teacher who was so kind to me. And I think that's part of what began to help me get interested in the idea of what I thought I wanted to do was help people, especially when they were struggling with things. And so I taught school for a little while. I actually did a master's degree in special education. I worked in a children's home for a while. I worked with kiddos who were struggling. And I guess what I found for me is that the theme that ran through that is that I really enjoyed being with people at difficult times in their lives and trying to figure out how I might help them. As a teacher, I wasn't really very good at teaching in terms of, you know, running the classroom, but I thought I did a pretty good job of getting to know the kiddos. And so in my, you know, early 30s, well, this is another thing. I was lucky. I met a guy who was a counselor, and he so impressed me. And I loved the way he was in the world, and I loved how he interacted with people. And I thought, I think that's something I want to do. And it made sense to me. And so that's when I went back to graduate school and ended up kind of finding my way a little bit. But I had people who were sort of helped me get that. So the idea of being a counselor really just came about because, again, I got some really great direction. And I think also I was in a place where I was able to sort of be lost for a while and wander around and kind of find a good fit for me. And, that's when I talk to college freshmen or sophomore, any college student who says, gosh, I don't know what I want to do. And I'm like, yeah, I get that, and I don't know that we have to. So for me, I think it was really a question of sort of wandering around and trying to find a fit for me. So my career as a counselor kind of came about. It was sort of, I stumbled into it like most things in my life.
So in terms of counseling, the counseling process, there's mental health support, career counseling support on campus and in the community. And I think a lot of students are maybe who haven't heard of, maybe they've heard of counseling, but they're like, what is counseling?
Right.
And the notion can kind of be scary to those who haven't been to counseling before. So can you define, tell us about what counseling is, what it isn't, what people can expect?
Right. I think that's a great point, Rebekah, because even though I think we are more open to getting mental health counseling, therapy, whatever it is, than we've ever been, I think there's still some stigmas and some fear that's around the notion of counseling. What's going to happen to me? Is my counselor going to do something to me? Am I going to have to, be in some weird situation? And so it makes sense that it's still a scary and uncertain thing. As I've gotten through my professional life, my idea about what it means to be a counselor and what counseling is has evolved. But the place that I am right now is that what I would tell anybody is that no one has gotten through life by themselves. None of us have made it through anything alone, whether it was in our school, whether it was in our personal life, whether it was in trying to find a job, whatever we were doing. People have always been helpful to us, whether it was our family, our friends, our teachers, our coaches, somebody at our church, whoever it was. And so when we are in challenging times, especially, that's when I think we need someone else to talk to, someone else to help us get a better sense about what we're doing, to help us remind us that we're not in this by ourselves. And so what I would tell people is counseling, going to see a counselor for whatever the topic is, whether it's I'm struggling in school, so I need academic support, or I don't know about a career, so I'm going to talk to someone there. I'm trying to decide on a major, whether it's, personal issues, whatever it may be. I think the idea is that we're going to go have a conversation with someone, and they're going to get to know us, and they're just going to how to help us figure out, what are our options? How do we begin to figure things out a little different? And also just to give us a new perspective on it. So I think the idea of counseling that makes the most sense to me is that it's a place where two people can sit together, and if I'm doing a good job as a counselor, I'm going to create a place that's safe for them. And that if a place is safe enough and they feel comfortable enough, then they start to trust me a little bit. And if they trust me more, then they'll allow themselves to be a little bit more vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And I think when we become vulnerable with someone else, it becomes easier to tell the truth and to get to those things that really matter to us. And so if it's someone who is struggling with school, to be able to trust someone enough to be able to say, gosh, this is really where my fears are, and this is what's really scary for me, and this is what I'm really struggling with, to tell you that truth, then I think there's a chance for them to begin to understand what really is stopping me, what is really in my way. And what I believe, after having done this for a while, is that each person, each of us, has everything we need in ourselves to deal with whatever issue comes up. But I don't always know how to access that. And so part of my job as a counselor is to help someone feel safe enough to get to those things and recognize what the real issue is, and then to recognize how I want to move forward from that. And I don't think that comes easily. I don't think that comes in 30 minutes. I don't think that comes in 1 or 2 sessions. I think it comes over time with building a trusting, safe environment so someone can actually get to those issues. And, we have professional counselors that do this who are trained in specific ways because the concerns that people come up with are more challenging and more complicated. But the truth is, all of us have been talking to trusted people all our lives, and we've been going to them when we needed help. And I think that's what I would tell anyone. A counselor is someone that gives you a trusted, safe place to be, to tell your story and to try to understand and to be known a little bit. So that's a kind of a convoluted answer, but that's what I think it is. I don't think it's scary. I think it's just talking to someone who wants to get to know you better.
Sure. Well, and are there different types of counseling? I mean, I guess, if somebody's saying, hey, I've got something I want to talk to somebody about, what kinds of counseling are there that they may be interested in?
Well, and that's the interesting thing. If you go on a college campus, lots of people have the title of counselor. And so you might go to someone in the career center who's a career counselor who's trained to help people make decisions about what they want to do with their professional life and how do they want to choose a major and how do they want to take that major into making decisions about a career and helping them with a resume and cover letters and interviews and things that are related to that. We have academic counselors who work specifically with people who are struggling with some aspect of being a student. And maybe they need help in learning some of the study skills that are successful, or how to get better organized, or how to approach a textbook more effectively, or how to get a schedule. And so that person that's trained specifically can do that. We have personal counselors, mental health counselors, who are going to talk about issues that are more affecting the individual's whole life. So that may be talking about relationships in their lives, or they may be talking about some personal angst or depression or some kind of experience that they're having. But we also see people that are skilled in things like financial aid. And so our Office of Financial Aid is going to talk with someone about how do you make good decisions about how do you know what loans to take out and how to do that. We have, counselors in some ways, when you go to the health center, the person there is providing some counsel for you about how to make better decisions about your physical well-being and that sort of thing. We've got counselors that deal specifically with issues related to maybe alcohol and drugs and addictions or eating disorders or things of that nature. We've got marriage and family counselors you can go to when your relationship specifically is struggling. So, and one of the interesting things about higher ed that I've seen over the time is we went from a place where we just had people in student affairs who tried to deal with things to recognizing that college students bring all of these issues. And we've got to have professionals who are trained to help our college students navigate whatever those specific issues may be, because there are a lot of things that get in a student's way that help them from being successful in the classroom. And sometimes it's an academic issue, but more often than not, it's something that's affecting them as a person. And so we've got to help them navigate that so they can be successful. So, those are just some of the things I'd say.
So what would you say is your favorite aspect of counseling?
Yeah, that's a great thing, Jeremy. I think the thing that I have come to really love the most is the idea of sitting with someone and getting to know their story. And someone said this a long time ago, and I just think it's really true. If you let yourself really get to know and become involved with someone else as a counselor or the client, you just can't help but love that person. And you get their story and it's like, oh my gosh, and you see them in a way that you've never seen them before. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that's really amazing like that is that people will trust you enough and really honor you with their story. One of the things that still, it's happened to me lots of times, but it still just it gives me chills, is someone will say, I've never said this to anyone else before. Mm-hmm. And I think, gosh, that's amazing. Here's someone who might be 65 years old and they're saying, this is a story I've been hanging on to all my life. Mm-hmm. And now I feel safe enough to tell it. That is such an honor. It's such a privilege. And to be with people in those vulnerable times, I don't know, for some reason, that's just really It just moves me. It energizes me. It makes what it feels like to me is I'm doing something I'm kind of supposed to do. You know, as someone who's never known what he was supposed to do, it really feels like it feels like it connects to me really personally. The other thing that I try to tell my clients, but it's true, I get so much out of being in the room with people because they are telling me their stories. They're telling me their struggles. They're telling me how they got through things in their life. And first of all, it's like, oh my gosh, how did you do that? Mm-hmm. And it always connects to something personal for me. And I'm thinking, man, that makes a lot of sense. And so after I sit with someone and they tell me their story, not only do I not ever see them the same, I don't really see myself the same because I'm changed by that interaction too. And to me, that's just, it's really remarkable. It's really an amazing thing. And often I find myself thinking, gosh, that's just crazy that I'm in that place and people share those things with me. And it feels just like like I said, it feels like an honor. It feels like a privilege. So that's always the part that's most interesting to me. And so I think that's the part that draws me into the experience more. And that's what makes it fresh because every time it's different. You know, even if you've seen somebody 50 times, it's not the same. Their story's not the same.
And knowing that you have a lot of experience as a counselor, do you have a theoretical approach that you draw upon? I mean, what is your personal counseling approach, would you say?
That's a great thing, you know, Rebekah. And I think especially early on in our training, we got to figure out what our theoretical orientation is and who's the person that, you know, and I think for me, I got exposed to a lot of different stuff that I liked. You know, I think like most people, I really liked Carl Rogers' work and how he talked about the person-centered thing. But I also got exposed to a whole lot of William Glasser's work with choice theory and reality therapy, and that was interesting to me. I've liked some of Carl Jung's things about some of the concepts that he puts together. After running around doing this for a while, when I answer that question now, what I find is I don't know that I could say, oh, I'm following this particular theoretical orientation. I'd like to think that I maybe have learned skills from different techniques that might be useful to me. But honestly, when I'm sitting with a client now, the thing that I'm trying most to do is to be as fully present with them in the moment as I can be, because it's so easy to get distracted by everything. So I really want to be as present with them, and I really want to hear their story. And what I really want to do is to see what I can do to get to know that person as deeply as I can. You know, so I'm very relational oriented, but I'm also really trying to, I try to listen to what the themes are that they're telling me and how that connects to something larger. And that's really interesting to me. So I think that's what I have really tried to focus on is how can I remember, regardless of what they're putting in front of me, no matter what the issue is, how can I not become distracted by their depression or their anxiety or their whatever this diagnosis is? And how can I remember I'm sitting in the room with a human being and I want to be in a relationship with them? And how can I be as present with them and fully hear their story and get to know them? I'm a person who likes to ask lots of questions. I like to ask kind of what the meaning is for something with people, and so them to try to understand that a bit better. I'm probably more interested in those larger concepts than, you know, trying to come up with a 3-step plan to help someone make a change. But to me, I think if I have a chance to be successful with someone, it'll be because I've developed a connection with them and a relationship with them, and they come, and when they sit with me, they feel like this, I really want to know them. So not really a great answer. I would have got that wrong on the test, I think. But anyway, that's what makes the most sense to me. Frankly, that's what I would say I end up trying to do. And I found I think the process has become simpler for me, more difficult in some ways, but I've tried to make it as simple as I can.
So speaking about training, each profession has their own path you have to follow. So you tell us, what is the basic path someone needs to follow to become a counselor.
Right. And, you know, Jeremy, like anything else, it's amazing how once you get into details, it gets so complicated, you know, because people say, now, are you a psychologist? It's like,
Right.
well, kind of, but are you a therapist? You know, so one of the things, first of all, that's confusing is the term counselor and therapist can be used as a real broad sense of anyone who sits across from someone and tries to help them work on their concerns. But in every state in the United States, the term counselor is a protected term. So if I wanted to become a professional counselor, a licensed professional counselor, and that's the acronym for us, and an LPC, then there's a specific way that goes about it. It is not completely uniform in every state. It's becoming more so. But in Mississippi, and Mississippi's, you know, fairly similar to most states. But first of all, there's an academic requirement. You're going to have at least a master's degree. And that master's degree is going to have at least 60 hours of coursework. And it's going to have to cover a specific classes. There's 10 or 12 different areas. So you've got to have a very specific curriculum and make sure that you've got training in very specific classes. So you do the academic portion of it. Then there's also, you know, counseling is interesting because it's really, in many ways, it's like a trade that you're learning. It's like you get all this training and the academic notions about it and the theoretical stuff about it, but you really have to have a skill that you've got to be able to practice. And so in order to show that you can do that, you have to demonstrate that by doing hours, and we call it practicum and internship. So students got to spend 600, 700 hours under supervision as a part of their academic training, just to show that they can actually do it. So if you're going through the training, you've got to make videos of yourself doing the counseling. You've got to show that you can demonstrate it. So what we're not only are we saying you passed the class, but we're saying you've demonstrated that you have a skill that you can utilize. So we do that. So once a person has the degree, then they have to get licensed by a particular state. And this is not any different than getting a medical license or getting a law license or anything like that. It's regulated by each individual state. So if you're going to get licensed to be a professional counselor in the state of Mississippi, there's a board that oversees that license, and they have specific guidelines that you have to do. Again, the first one of those is you've got to satisfy the academic requirements. And then you have to show that you can actually practice that. So to be a counselor in Mississippi right now, once you have your degree, after you finish your master's degree, you have to do 3,000 hours of supervised work. Wow. So you start thinking, you do the math on that. So if you work 40 hours a week times 50 weeks, that's 2,000. So it takes a year and a half if you're working full time, and you have to be supervised by someone who has credentials that shows that they can be a supervisor. And so if I'm going to get my license, I get my degree, and I've done all that stuff, then I have to register with the board, and then I have to find a licensed a supervisor who's certified by the state. So I might go talk to Rebekah and say, hey, would you be my supervisor? And she would say, no way, I'm going to do that for you. But I would find a supervisor, and then once a week, I would meet with her, and we'd talk about what I'm doing. And so for a year and a half, she would meet with me on a weekly basis. And essentially what she's saying is, this person has the skills necessary. This person is not only have they got the academic requirements, they've also, they've shown that they have a skill level that does it. Then there's also a test that you have to pass that the state of Mississippi has. It essentially shows that you have ability to do that. So for most people, you finish a master's degree, you have about 2 years of supervision following that degree. You pass this exam, and if you do all that sort of stuff, and then you send everything in and you check all the boxes properly, at that point, then you can be a licensed professional counselor in the state of Mississippi, in some most states. And I think part of what we want to try to say is, this is a degree. This is not. It's not just somebody who's a pal sitting there having coffee with you. It's a person who's gone through a lot of training, someone who has a lot of ability, and that they have to demonstrate that. And then once you get a license, you have to renew that license every 2 years. You have to take a certain number of continuing education. So the idea is, we want you to know. So if you're seeking out a counselor and you see someone that has that credential, they're a licensed counselor, you know that you're getting someone who has a particular level of not only academic credentials, but experience, and they've been supervised, and you can trust them, and you're going to get good quality care. And that's an ongoing thing. So it's a little bit of a long, it's a long,
Right.
a long slog. Yeah, it is. And frankly, you know, if you want to do it, it's a pretty big commitment, because from the day you start your master's degree until you've got your license, the fastest you can probably do that's about 4 years. So it's not a small commitment to be able to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned supervision. Supervision is such an important part of the process. Does your approach to supervision differ than your approach to being a counselor? Are they pretty similar? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Rebekah, because you're right. Supervision is such a critical aspect of what we're doing. And I think that's probably true in any profession, but I think it's particularly true in ours. I guess my overarching concept about supervision are pretty similar, or share a lot of the same ideas that I have about counseling. Someone said this, and I've hung on to this. I think supervision, to be successful, I think as a supervisor, I have to create a space so that my supervisee feels like they can tell me the truth. So what does that mean? That means if they really screwed up with a client and they felt like, oh my gosh, I completely lost my mind or did something like that, that they feel safe enough to tell me that they're struggling. Not to say, I'm just going to tell you what I think you want to hear so you'll check off, but that we will have an honest enough relationship that they can genuinely talk to me about what they need help with. And I won't do that. And having been supervised a ton, I'm not going to tell my supervisor something if I'm afraid. If I think, oh my gosh, they're going to bite my head off, or they're going to think I'm stupid, or, you know, if I admit that I'm human and I'm struggling with this, that they're going to immediately, you know, label me in some way. So if I've created a safe enough place that my supervisee can tell the truth, then I think what happens is we have a chance for the supervisor and the supervisee to have a productive relationship, so there can be some real growth. Because I think my job as a supervisor is to help that person find their voice. So if, you know, Rebekah's not the same, you're not the same counselor that I am. And so if I'm a successful supervisor, I don't need to get you to try to sound like me. I need you to get to sound like Rebekah. And I think if you trust me and you feel safe, then you can find your voice. You can struggle with that a little bit, and you can wrestle around with it and try to find it. And I think when you're acting most like yourself, I think that's when you do your best work, when you're doing it in the way that you would do it. But it's hard to do that because, you know, I want to please people. I want you to like me and that sort of thing. And so that's part of it. The biggest struggle for me as a supervisor, frankly, is telling somebody what I think of as kind of bad news, or when they're struggling, when I need to point out a place where they have growth. And that's a place that I always struggle. I'm really good at telling you that you're doing a great job, but the idea is saying, okay, here's a place where you need to do some more work. That's a place that I don't do as well. So I've got to be able to tell the truth too, you know, as a supervisor. And so, but I think supervision is really, it gets back to that idea of having a safe, trusting relationship where the supervisee can be vulnerable.
So is there a difference between being a supervisor and a manager in counseling?
A really good point. Yeah, there is. That's a great point, Jeremy. For a big part of my career, I was in a place where I was managing other counselors. And so I think of managing as more kind of professional responsibilities that you have to do and take care of that. Supervision in the counseling world is a really specific role. Okay. Usually someone who is designated. So if I'm going to go work someplace and I need a supervisor, and Rebekah is my supervisor, then we have a very specific role that we play together, and there are expectations that I have of her. Now, as a manager, I think I want to do some of the same things. I think I want to create a safe relationship. I want the people that I'm managing to feel comfortable and to feel like I'm on their side, and that we can have honest conversations around it. But the supervision has a very specific thing that we're trying to get to. Also, in our world, the supervision there's a real clinical element to that. So if Rebekah's my supervisor, I'm going to be telling her about intimate things that went on in a client session. And I'm going to be talking to her about that. And she's going to be a part of that with me. And
Right.
so the client confidentiality extends to her. As a manager, yeah. So, but if I'm your manager, if I'm the director somewhere and you're one of the counselors working for me, part of my management may not be, well, tell me what went on with that client, but it may be, okay, we need to talk about your schedule and how many people you're seeing and how do you help you be more successful? So I think managing, again, has some of the same roles as supervision.
Mm-hmm.
I think just as a supervisor, I don't want you to be afraid. I don't want you to be intimidated. I want us to be on the same side of the fence. But the role can be a little bit different. But it's interesting because sometimes you have both roles, because there are times when I was providing direct supervision for people that I was also their manager in terms of their workplace. And I think that can get a little complicated, because sometimes those roles overlap a little bit, and trying to figure out where those boundaries are can be a little bit of a challenge, Yeah. So, but I think that's a really, really good point though.
Yeah. And getting back to, I'm thinking, getting back to the start of our conversation when it comes to college students, because I know you've worked with college students for a long time and in a lot of different capacities, but especially counseling. And, we operate and help students from an academic support context, students who come in, and a lot of times parents who say, okay, can you help this person or that person, my son or daughter, with navigating college? And a lot of times, like you mentioned, and I wanted to kind of emphasize this point too, or to kind of pick your brain about this point, a lot of the times when students are having academic problems, it's not so much, of course, study skills are just hard to know in advance anyhow, but study skills are just a small component of that picture. And sometimes we find students have been through some difficult stuff. What exactly is trauma? And do you think that impacts how college students perform in their academic environment?
And Rebekah, you make such a great point. A parent wants to say, well, why isn't Ralph passing biology? What's the problem here? How come he's not a good math student? That sort of thing. And you're right. I think so often the issue is more than just academic performance. Trauma is a term that we get, gets tossed around in lots of different ways. One of the things when I think about trauma is, first of all, it's so individual. You and I may have the same experience. We may experience the same event, and it may be traumatic for me. It may be overwhelming to me. It may impact me in a very strong way and maybe a negative way, and it may not have that same impact on you. So I think trauma for me, in probably a more general way, is it's any experience that we have as an individual that in some way sort of overwhelms our ability to cope with it effectively. And it affects our whole person. It affects our ability to think clearly. It affects our emotions. It has an effect on our physiology. And the folks who study trauma all the time sometimes talk about big T trauma and little t trauma, And I think sometimes we have a tendency to think, oh, it's a trauma, it must be something terrible. Somebody was in a horrible automobile accident, or they had a death in the family, or somebody was in a war, or they had something like that. And those are huge traumas. But I think working with college students, something that's really important, and something that I tried to do was to recognize that just the experience of being in college can be traumatic for an individual. So let's think about a freshman who's coming to college. You guys are going to have a bunch of those showing up on your door here in just a few minutes. What do you think about that? So here's somebody who's coming to a place they've never been before, never lived before. Maybe they're moving away from home for the first time. Most of them are probably sharing a room with someone for the first time, may or may not be somebody that they've ever known. They're taking classes from teachers that they don't know. Many of them went to schools where they went into every class and they knew everybody in there. And now they're going to walk into a class and not know anybody. A lot of them came and they were good students. They did really, really well, and they're used to being successful. Also, they had identities where they were. They were They wrote for the newspaper or the school paper, or they were in the band, or they were cheerleader, or they were in the science club, or they had an identity. And now all of a sudden they come to college and they're just one of the masses. Maybe they grew up in a small town where there were 100 people in their graduating class, and now they're in a class that has more people in it than that. All of those things, they're having to learn to do things they've never done before, like their laundry. They got to take care of their meals themselves. They got to manage their time, and they're doing that separated from their support system, whether it's family or their close friends. There's so much change, and so you think about all those deals. Well, some kids thrive in that. They're like, oh, this is exciting, and they're doing well. But I think most of us struggle with trying to adjust to that change. And for some students, just that creates trauma for them that they don't manage very well. They're used to being the best math student. Well, I'll use myself as an example. So I went to a small high school, and when I did okay in math, and so my advisor said, well, you ought to just skip the college algebra and go right into this, calculus class. And I'm like, well, sure, because, I'm, really, really smart. Well, I was so lost in that. Yeah, I was lost as I could be from the first day in that class. And I felt stupid in that class every day. And I would go meet with the teacher and try to do stuff. And I just struggled every day in that class, and the teacher felt sorry for me and gave me a D, so he would never have to see me again. So, yeah. And here's the thing: I was a decent math student. I never took another math class again in college. And so, was it trauma for me? Yeah, it kind of was. It kind of was, because I thought, yeah, I know what I'm doing. I know this math stuff, and I just felt so dumb. Well, you take any kid and put them in a situation where they're used to being successful, they're used to doing well, used to have an identity, and man, all of a sudden that's gone from them, and now they don't have that. And so, is that the same as having just experienced a death in the family? No, we're putting it on the the scale. But to that individual, to that student who's trying to figure out how to make it, that's so overwhelming for them. And what skills do they have? I say this to kids a lot of times. If you grew up in a town, you lived there most of your life, you probably never learned how to make friends, because you always had friends around. You didn't have to worry about it. And all of a sudden, I got to figure out how am I going to make friends with people? I'm living with somebody I don't even know. Like I said, I have a roommate who was raised by wolves. What do I do? How do I adjust to that? And so it's hard. And so what I would say is, there are so many things that create a traumatic experience for students. And it's not, most often, it's not one event, but it's the cumulative experience. And you guys know this. You talk to a freshman, and they're kind of like the first couple of weeks of school. It's like, hey, I'm making it okay. I'm a little homesick, but I'm making it okay. But then after midterms, they may just feel completely overwhelmed because they just kind of get beaten up by it through the whole semester. Now, some people, again, they get over it and they do well. But I think what we've got to recognize is that the trauma can be a lot of small things that add up over time. It can be not having the ability to adjust to change very well. It can be not having adapted to learn how to develop many coping skills. If you grew up in a family where your folks took care of a lot of things for you, which we have a lot of students who do that, and they never had to learn how to manage things for themselves, not being able to do that can be tough. Also, we have kids who come and have not really faced failure or rejection very much, and suddenly they feel like they're not doing well, whatever it may be. They didn't get into the right group. They don't have this support system. So I think part of what we have to do when we're working with colleges, no matter what it is we have to recognize that the experience of being in college can provide some trauma for them, and they may be completely overwhelmed by that. And as a result, they're not putting the work in. They shut down. They show up in class, but they're not there. They don't know how to prepare very well. And so a kid who maybe is not a bad student, all that experience means they just can't focus in class, or they shut down completely and they don't go anymore, or they don't do well. So yeah, I think the trauma doesn't have to be, a life-altering experience, but it can be those adjustments to all those changes. And that can happen to somebody who's a junior or a senior. who's used to doing pretty well, and all of a sudden they run into a wall and it's like, oh my gosh, what happened? Or as all of you know, you got a gal or a guy who's been doing pretty well, and then something happens. They have a breakup, in a relationship, and all of a sudden that's all they can think about, and then they can't focus in class. And people say, well, that's just a break. Well, if that was the person you thought you were going to spend your life with, and then that fell apart, it can make a huge difference. So I think part of what we're looking at with college students is helping them adjust to those things that happen that are traumatic for them and that they don't have the skills for. And how do we help them navigate that and really tap into those strengths that they haven't had to utilize before? I don't know if I'm answering your question very well or not.
Well, that's very helpful, because I think sometimes students feel like, oh, well, if I ask a question, it's going to sound silly. And I always try to tell students, like, there's no such thing as a silly question. I mean, I think it's just hard for them to know there's a lot of other people, whether they're freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors, that are going through maybe similar stuff but aren't necessarily showing it. But yeah.
Oh, I think you're so right, Rebekah, because I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to look vulnerable. I don't want to look dumb. I don't want to look weak, and so I'm just going to keep my mouth shut and not ask for any help. And until it's, until you really can't do it. So I think you're so right. It looks like everybody else has got it figured out,
Yeah.
And I usually say this, that there are two kinds of students: the ones who are homesick and the ones who lie about it. But I think everybody gets homesick at some point or another. But that's one of the things, if you say that, it makes you sound like you're stupid. Well, I think you're right. What happens if I can't ask for help, if I can't tell people I'm struggling, my gosh, that's a scary place to be,
Right. Yeah. So aside from counselor, supervisor, and mentor, talking about teaching, you're also a professor on campus.
That's true.
So could you tell us about some of the classes that you teach and your approach to those classes?
Sure. I have been, like I said, I'll go back to being a lucky guy. I've been really fortunate because I've gotten a chance to be involved. One of the great things that happened to me in my career in higher ed is I've gotten a chance to be in the classroom, which I've turned out to like a lot. And I've taught several different kinds of undergrad classes. I've taught the study skills class, the 101 class. I've taught the EDHE 105 class. I guess I've taught the 220 whatever for the 300. Anyway, I've taught the intro to career classes. I guess is at the 200 or 300 level of those. Mm-hmm. The numbers have changed, but I've taught those. And then in graduate school, I've gotten to teach quite a few classes as it relates to counseling, whether it's counseling theories. I've taught career counseling. I've taught group counseling. I've gotten a chance, actually for a while, I got a chance to work in communicative disorders, and they asked me to come over and teach some classes about counseling theories there. Taught the diagnostics class. I've taught internship and practicum, and so quite a few classes, but it's been really interesting. So yeah, I've been really fortunate because I've got a chance to work from first semester freshmen to doctoral students.
Right.
And that's been really, really interesting to see it. And so, so was your question sort of like, what do I do in the classroom? Is that kind of
right? So what's your approach to? I mean, you run the gamut of freshmen to doc students. So how do you take each class and make it a Showalter class?
Right. Yeah. Boy, that's a great question. When I started out undergrad, I was teaching. I thought I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher, mm-hmm. And so I've taught kids as young as 4 years old in the classroom, and now I've taught adults and stuff like that. And what I think, Jeremy, is whether it's first semester freshmen or doctoral students in their last semester, or frankly preschoolers, I think in many ways they're a lot more similar than they are different.
Right.
I think one of the things, first of all, I think the students want to know that you care about them. Mm-hmm. Do you care about me as an individual? Do you know who I am? Is there something about me that helps you to see that you see me? And so one of the things I try to do is to figure out how I can know my students. And so for me, I think my responsibility is to figure out, how do I see them as individuals? Do I see something about them that's different? So that may mean that with undergraduate students, before class starts, I may ask them about, what they did over the weekend, or what their hobbies are, or where they live. Do they have brothers and sisters? Do they like pets? And those may sound just like sort of, chit-chat kind of questions, but I think part of what I'm doing is I'm getting to know you. And if I found out that Jeremy likes to play guitar, then maybe that's something that we can talk about. And if I say, hey, I was in a guitar store last weekend, Jeremy, and I saw this thing, suddenly you're not just another kid in the class, you're a kid that I recognize. And so I think you want to be seen. I think the other piece of that is I need to figure out, how do I reach you? Because I think my responsibility is not to say, I'm just this purveyor of great information. I'm this fount of wisdom, and you just drink from this. And if you can't, then somehow, that's your fault. I think if I'm going to be an effective teacher, I've got to recognize that the way Jeremy takes this information in is not the same way Rebekah does. And so I've got to figure out, how can I say the same thing in a way that Jeremy can hear it? Can I present, and that may not be the same way that Rebekah can hear it. And so I think part of my responsibility is saying, how do I do that? How do I learn that a little bit about you? And part of that means I've got to, and that's, I've taught some really big classes, and that's almost impossible. But I think if I've had any success, it's because I've got a chance to know that, the way that Jeremy does best is when he and I talk on an individual basis, one-on-one after class or something. Or I make sure that he gets some really specific examples that are real tangible, because that's the way he likes to take it in. Or I connect it to something that I know Rebekah cares about, and that, or by saying that, we have something in common, then Rebekah begins to think, oh, well, then Dr. Showalter likes me a little bit, so maybe I can feel a little more at ease. So I think part of it is recognizing that they want to know you care about them. I also want to make sure that I never do anything in my class that embarrasses a student, and I think back about all the times that I've been embarrassed and I've been afraid in class, and I know I never learned anything when I was afraid. And I am sure that there's a million times that I've done something that embarrassed a student and made them feel afraid, but I'm sure I have. But my goal is to say, can I do something so that when you come in this classroom, like you were saying, Rebekah, not a silly question, I want my students to recognize whatever they say to me, that we may laugh about it, we may be lighthearted about it, but I'm not going to make fun of you. I'm not going to be disrespectful to you. I'm not going to treat you in a way that puts you in a fearful place, or that somehow says, because you're vulnerable right now, you don't happen to know something, or you didn't do it. That when you're in that vulnerable place, and as students were pretty vulnerable, that I treated you with respect, and I treated you with maybe some kindness, maybe some compassion. My hope is then that you'll trust me a little bit more. And I think if you trust me and think I care about you, then I think I have a chance to have some influence with you. So part of what I want to do, Jeremy, is not say, because I don't really think of myself as much of an academic. I'm not sure I've got all this, great information to share. But what I hope I can do is to say, I care about you, and I think you're important. And as a result, maybe I can have some influence on you. If you're in school, you can probably read, so you probably can figure some of this stuff out. But how do I help create that space that you want to know maybe what I'm trying to talk to you about, or that that I care about you. So I think I'm always about trying to create an environment in my classes that feels, again, I get going back to that same word, that feels safe and trusting, that feel like a place where people can be themselves, that they can be respected, and they can feel known a little bit. So I want it to be fun. I want us to be able to have some fun with each other. I want them to kind of get to know me a little bit as much as they want to. I want them to see me as a real person. I think they'll probably, if I make a mistake, I want to make sure they know that. I want to be willing to apologize to students. I want to be willing to help hold them accountable, but also realize I can drop the ball too. And I've always felt like I'm working for my students. It's like they bought this class from the University of Mississippi, and I'm here now. I'm like their sales representative, and so I need to figure out how to give them their money's worth. And so that's what I'm trying to do. That's what I'm trying to get to. That's what I'm trying to create a space for. And if that happens, then I think I've been successful. I don't know. Again, I don't know how many students you can find who say, "Oh, I remember Dr. Showalter taught me this." I'm not sure they can find it, but you might be able to find one or two who said, "I think that Showalter guy cared about me a little bit." And to me, if I'm able to do that, that's probably that's my bigger goal, frankly. And so I think that's what I have to offer them more than some brilliance,
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate your expertise and your wisdom, and we've got a couple of lightning round questions for you, which we thought we'd kind of throw you a couple curveballs. No, I'm just kidding. But we are interested in knowing, speaking of college, we've talked about college students, we've talked about a lot of great stuff. What about you as a college student? What was your freshman year like? Dr. Showalter's freshman year, paint us a picture.
Man. Well, first, it's hard. It's going to be hard for you to believe this, Rebekah, but I was more lost then than I am now. And I know that's shocking. I had no idea what I wanted to do, no idea what I was doing. I shouldn't even have been in college. I should have been somewhere, working at a quick stop or something, because I was not ready. It turned out I went to a small college that was in the same town where my parents lived. So I actually lived with my folks my freshman year. And in retrospect, I think I would have been better off if I had not done that. But having done that, I did not know what I was doing in class. I was not a serious student at all. I did not do very well. I had a really good time. I had a lot of friends. I was really, probably more involved in trying to get to know people. I was incredibly insecure, incredibly self-conscious. Felt awkward most of the time. I really wanted people to like me. So as a result, I was incredibly overbearing and stuff like that. So I remember feeling afraid a lot and sort of lost and trying to make sure nobody knew that. I was awkward and geeky and, a below average student. So, I paint a pretty good picture there, I would say. And I got through it because there were people were very nice to me. But there were very few things about my academic career as a freshman that I would hold up as any kind of model. So
who is someone that you would say inspired you during your undergraduate career?
That's a great question, Jeremy. I made a slight reference to this. When I was about a sophomore, I guess, I changed my major to elementary education, and I had to take a class in special ed. I didn't know anything about special ed at the time. And there was a lady whose name was Lois Brown, who was the teacher of that class. Eccentric, sort of an odd character. But for whatever reason, she was so kind to me and took an interest in me, invited me to come to her office. We had a lot of great conversations. But there was something about her presence with me that gave me the sense, and again, I guess probably what I said about my own philosophy as a teacher, she really cared about me. And I was, again, not a good student, lost as a goose, and she had no reason to treat me well, other than that she just wanted to. And so she was an incredible inspiration to me. I changed my major to special ed after that one semester, took every class from her I could. She was just so good to me. And like I said, on the surface, there was nothing that we should have had in common. She was, again, an odd kind of eccentric kind of person, but in her presence, I felt capable. I felt like I could do something. And I didn't remember ever feeling that way in school, especially at that point in college. And I know I wanted more of that. And so I probably couldn't have told you that at the time, but as I've thought back about it, as an undergraduate, she was by far the most influential teacher that I had. I know I never told her that, and I regret that, because I wish she knew that, because so much of what I think I have done in my career was influenced by that woman. And I'm guessing she doesn't even, if she's still living, she probably couldn't remember me, couldn't put me out of a lineup. But she was an incredible influence on me. And again, I just was so grateful to her and so thankful to her.
Mm-hmm. So the last question we have for you, do you have any advice for anyone who wants to be a counselor?
Whew, yeah, let's see. First of all,
where do you start?
It is the road to financial riches. You will make $1 million. Here's the thing. First of all, it has turned out to be an amazing career for me, and it was a great fit for me. But what I would tell somebody is, if you think you want to be a counselor, you need to be prepared for the fact that sitting in the room with people and going through the process of trying to learn it is going to change you. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to look at yourself. You're going to have to examine parts of yourself you're not really excited about seeing. And you won't see the world the same. You won't see yourself or the world the same after doing this. And there are a lot of careers that don't do that. They don't ask you to bring your whole self every day to the business. And to be, I think, the way I've done it, to have a chance of being an effective counselor, I think you need to be prepared for that. And I don't think we do a great job in our training programs of preparing students for that, of how it's going to affect you personally and what it's going to have. So I would say, be prepared for that and the way it's going to, things that are in your life, things that you, issues you might have, things you might struggle with, those are going to come to the surface. Mm-hmm. And you're probably going to have to figure out how to address those. And you may know parts, lots of the parts of myself I don't like looking at, and they keep coming back again and again. I would say that. The other thing I would say is, it is a job where every day you leave the end of the day thinking, I think I may have had an impact on the world today. I may have made a difference. It's how you two feel when you work with students every day. Mm-hmm. It's that idea that, I think I did something that made a difference today. You can't always tell what it is. It's not like nailing two boards together, but you had an impact on someone's life. And that's a remarkable thing. It really is. That's an amazing thing. And frankly, I almost think of it as kind of a sacred thing that we have this opportunity to really be involved in people's lives at vulnerable times for them. And, when I think about this teacher you asked me about, I love how I feel when I think about her and what she did for me. It would, I would love to think I might have had an impact on some student in my life that did something like that. So I think as a counselor, you might have that opportunity. So, yeah.
Well, Dr. Showalter,
it's not a bad job.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being a guest on the ChitChat. For Rebekah Reysen, I'm Jeremy Roberts. Thank you so much for watching this episode. We'll see you next time. Bye.